Welcome to the Evolved Empath Summit, a free online event where you'll learn from top experts how to turn your empathic gifts into your greatest strength. Share this powerful program with your friends and family, and come join us on Facebook at The Shift Network. And now your host, Bevan Neiman.
Welcome back to our amazing summit event, wherever on the planet that you're hailing from today. And I'm so incredibly honored to introduce you to our next special guest speaker, Denise Dryden, who is an empath, a pioneer, and an innovator who coaches around personal relationship systems. Her focus is on empowering younger, energetically sensitive generations to lead with their intrinsic strengths. Denise has a global coaching practice, and she does a weekly live video on Facebook that provides clarity and tools to apply and create change. Denise, I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome.
Oh, Bevan, this is such a treat. And this conference, this information is so valuable that it's an honor to be able to participate with you and the shift and bring this information forward. So thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I know that, you've been working in a really unique industry for the last 25 years, really working with sensitives and empaths in the therapeutic industry. Can you tell us a little bit about those experiences and what you've noticed, some trends and things that you've discovered?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess the bottom line is I've always been an educator, and I'm an educator who watches things on a much different level. I watch the emotional interactions. I watch what brings somebody up, what shuts them down, and whether I'm working with material or athletics or emotions or anything. And around 1995, so we're looking at years ago, right? I started working on the fringe of young adult therapeutic placement for independent living skills, recovery support, emotional regulation. Because I lived in Bend, Oregon, and there were a bunch of little programs there. And I found, my passion, my love, which is what happens when you have a growing teen or young adult who can't work with the existing family system and ends up being picked up and placed in wilderness or in therapeutic boarding school or in boarding school that then turns into therapeutic boarding school because they have these patterns of acting out against the world or against themselves that don't work. And so I started initially coaching young adults, 19 to 24-year-olds coming out of this independent living program, and then sort of shifted throughout the years into the center of it as both running admissions, being a director on the program with its design and its intake policies and its treatment adjustments, and then rapidly over the last few years have been moving out towards the fringe again, because what I'm noticing is that our initial focus, in the 90s was on that oppositional defiant kid, how to break their spirit, how to let them know who's in charge, sort of that tough love. And it didn't seem to work very well with the larger population. And as we have progressed over the years, I've watched the defiant kid become much more internally defiant. So that kid has started isolating, started pushing people away, started having extreme temper tantrums when pushed too hard with parents, especially, or siblings. They hide it from the general population. They're introverted mostly, and they have a different mindset. And so they self-medicate with weed, they self-medicate with video games, screens. They use a lot of art and music to ground themselves. And I realized when you and I first met in 2015 and we started talking about sensitivity and the highly sensitive person, it laid a format over onto this psychiatric, psychological DSM diagnosis based industry, and went, oh, we're seeing such overwhelm, such reaction to dissonance within family systems. So since 2015 and moving forward, I've been holding both the psychology DSM, like what is anxiety, what's depression, what is profound opposition, familial relationship dynamic issues, with the HSP DOES from Elaine Aron, and kind of going, these have some things in common. So I've been weaving them together, and sharing them with you, sharing them with on my videos, sharing them with the world, and saying, what if we have an emerging population that's really sensitive and empathic? What do we do with that?
Mhm. Yeah, because I would assume that a lot of their parents don't understand how to communicate with them, how to understand their way of being. I know a lot of our listeners probably grew up in that kind of a dynamic where they didn't really feel understood, and they didn't feel like they fit in to what the quote unquote norms are for societal culture. I know I experienced that as well. I mean, were you seeing this as you started to lay over that HSP over the therapeutic programs, and what did you notice there?
Well, I'm also a historian by education. So I was looking at it generationally too, which is baby boomers have one set of ways of dealing with children, and Generation Xers have a completely different set. And so adjusting and looking at what happens when we compensate as parents for what we've had or didn't have, or what worked for us that we think should work for them. And so what I was noticing was the parenting life experiences and agenda were being imposed, almost not intentionally, but with harm, because they were trying to help, but shifting someone who didn't like that activity into something that worked for them. The example I would use is, if you found your peace through sports, and sports was the way that you used your body and you made friends and you took care of your free time. Sports may not be something, especially team dynamics and top down management and coaching strategies, may not be something that sensitive kids would want to be a part of, or empathic kids, because they have a lot more going on with the dynamics. And so then there's this, where the rubber meets the road. The parent wants them to be active, says, job, school, homework, as sports, athletic activities after school. These are the things you have to be involved in. And the kids looking at them and going, no, I
Mm-hmm.
can't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
old and new coming together.
Mm-hmm. And now you're really doing something very interesting. You're weaving all of the study you've done in astrology and tarot, and you're weaving this into all the psychological aspects and the energetic aspects as well. Tell us more about that.
Well, these things sort of drop in, and when they drop in, I go, well, that's kind of interesting. So when HSP stuff dropped in, and then I started expanding into the empath, which is a much broader sense than being simply sensitive. And if you don't mind, we can go back and talk about empaths after we talk about this intro to Chiron. Um, the concept of Chiron is, it's a planet that, it's just not even it's a very small planet that shows up on our astrology charts kind of randomly. And what I started to notice was that where they show up is actually linked to the same coaching work I'm working on with my parents and adults who are working on relationships. And so I started to practice. Well, give me your astrology stuff and I'll throw Chiron in there. And, first time it was matching, second time it was matching. I did a real quick study and worked with 22 different people, and they all consistently laid over the top. And these were counselors, therapists, corporate leaders, new age writers, and Chiron was identifying where their own personal wound was consistently. So now I have this ability to sort of go in with clinical teams that are helping with the family system if they're open, or working specifically with the parents or the adult on, let's go see what Chiron has to say and see how we can use this as a guide.
Mm-hmm. And, I just started looking into Chiron, after you and I, just, after you really introduced that to me. And And it is like the wounded healer, right? Which I think a lot of
Mhm.
empaths would relate to. Is that the sort of the archetype there?
The archetype is called the centaur, and the centaur is half man or half human, half horse. And the centaurs carry the ability, or have the ability to carry a wound, to carry something that's happened to them, and then to move through the human experience of that, and then turn it around and see the gifts from it. And there are, as I'm learning now, just since I signed up to do this with you, I've taken a deep dive into the centaur energy, and Chiron, is this wounded healer that holds the subtle resonance of neurological communication. Like, what happens when you notice that what you're saying or what you're seeing is out of sync with what's coming back at you? And how do you perceive that as a wound and keep hitting it over and over again when there's discord, between you and the world? And then how do you become aware that that wound is something that's a perspective from what you inherited from your family or from your environment?
Mm-hmm.
Which sort of dovetails nicely to the empath, because if we have empathic skills, right? And our empathic skills are all about our awareness of what's happening around us, and Chiron builds this resonance awareness and builds a vibrational bridge. Then Chiron ends up being probably one of the best tools that an empath can use to understand what is dissonant and what's bothering me and what can I do about it.
Mm-hmm. And you touched upon these patterns of what we're putting out and then what we're receiving back energetically, may have started with the family system, may be multi-generational, or even, if people choose to believe this, like past lifetimes, like it can be really deep. And is that correct?
Absolutely. These patterns can be, well, first and foremost, Chiron sets these like 1.5 year to 8 year patterns where it holds for a period of time that is reflective of what was going on with you in your home environment, in your personal, in the town you lived in the experiences you had, what was going on nationally, what was going on globally, what was going on genetically between you and your parents, if there was adoption, if there was shifting and death, like all of these things show up. And it is also reflective of the collective. So if it's the collective that can hold both what is existing in front of us now, what did you inherit from the planet that was happening when you were born, or what past life lessons have you brought up? So they're all intertwined as a vibrational story.
Mm-hmm. And I just recently read that Chiron moved into Aries. Can you tell us more about what that means? I love Aries. I'm an Aries.
Of course, I get to talk to an Aries about this. What that really means is that on April 17th, 2018, so not this, like a year and a half ago, we sort of went from when Chiron was in Pisces, which, for quite like 4 or 5 years, it was like, yeah, I have something going on. I can feel it sometimes. It's kind of out there, it floats around. I can't really put my finger on it. Think Pisces, right? Water. It's all over the place. And then on April 17th, it showed up and it went chwonk, and you went, uh-oh, it's right in front of me right now, and it's fierce and it's intense and I can't ignore it. And then it goes retrograde, and then it's internal, and then outternal, and internal and outternal. You're like, stop. So Aries, think of the emperor on the tarot cards. Think of, the ram. Think of fire. Think of, I'm here to get something done. I'm the first zodiac sign. I'm here to accomplish my sense of self. And you put your wound in Chiron, in that planet, and it starts saying, we have some work to do and you've been ignoring me, so let's get to work now. And you're like, shh, go away. Nope.
I can definitely say that's been true over the last year and a half in my own experience. So I'm like, what is this coming up? Yeah.
Exactly.
And then we see that in the collective as well, right? We see all this stuff coming up, the old Band-Aids kind of getting ripped off, because we're experiencing it on an individual and a collective level.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and the first time it showed up was April 18th or 17th, 2018. And then it sort of went retrograde and disappeared back into Pisces. And then and I'm looking at my chart right here because I knew that it went back and forth. February 18th, this last year. So it isn't even a year and a half ago. It's like less than a year ago. Our lives changed. We have something talking to us. Now, you're in Aries, so that means that if you were born between 1968 and 1976, you had one of the longest Chiron. Aries always has the longest Chiron age group, and a Chiron return means you're right back in it, which is 49 to 50 years, comes back around and it goes, I'm right in your face. And we have important work to do. And then about 6 to 8 years later, Saturn comes and goes, so how are you doing with the work that Chiron's been doing with you? You're like, shh.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, one of the things they say is that when you're willing and ready to kind of look at those pieces where you've been like the centaur carrying around this wound. And I know that for myself as an empath and a highly sensitive person, like I will carry that forever if I'm not aware of it. And it's such a burden on our energy system, on our physical body. Like, what are you seeing around that? Like, how do we start to look at that, have the courage to look at that, and then release some of this that we've been carrying around that really no longer serves us and moves us into a different pattern?
Yeah, it is one of our greatest challenges, which is it might be a wound, and it might be something that we just don't know if we can get over. And we go to our therapist, and we go to groups, and we work on our childhood and our past hurts. This happened to me in high school. This is where I was assaulted or abused. These are the stories I hold on to. And what because I have this psychology and now this really fun metaphysical skill set, and I've been blending them, is that there's strengths there, which is every time that something happened to us, we learned how to be fill in the blank. We learned how to be more observant. We learned how to be more to trust our intuition, to trust our intelligence, to trust our emotional intelligence and so we can go through and we can switch and adapt these. If we do it in a therapeutic environment, that's one way. What I'm suggesting is that by moving through Chiron and pairing it together, it gives us a very succinct approach. So the example I would use is that, and I know that this can I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of the details, but when you run a chart, an astrological chart, and you put Chiron in and say, where is it? It's going to tell you what house it's in. Like we talked about earlier, yours is in Aries, mine is in Aquarius, which means that when you take Chiron, this personality of the wound, and you put it into the sign that it was was when you were born, it has information. So you play with that dynamic, and you can Google or do any kind of engine search on Chiron in Aries and see what you learn about yourself. And that will sort of all of a sudden turn you and say, oh, I'm going this direction. I didn't know I was going to go that direction. And it kind of gives you an arrow to point at to find out where some of those wounds have been really isolated, or where you can get as succinct as possible on them. Right?
Absolutely.
Then we go to the house, because Chiron's in a specific house, and each house has a personality. Like, for instance, if it's in the first house, it's about yourself. It's in the second house, it's about resources. If it's about the seventh house, it's how you step out into the world and do relationships with others. Mine is in the eighth house, which is my group purpose. So the eighth house, so now I have Chiron in the eighth house. So then you can also do searches, Chiron in the eighth house. Well, that gives me a little bit more, which is, it seems like I'm teaching people about the way to access some of this information. I always teach what I experience. So whatever I experience, I become the teacher of. One thing I learned in mystery school in the last 2 years is that each house is 30 degrees, and each 30 degrees has a 10-degree decan. And I think it was, oh gosh, it wasn't Prometheus, it was Pythagoras, who laid out the tarot cards, or the numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then starts over and goes in these 10-degree decans all the way around, and then they alternate the elements. So what happens is that the more we study it and the more we move towards Chiron, all of a sudden we have information of the sign, of the house, which is the focal area. And then we go to these decans and look at the tarot cards, which means mine's in water. Mine's around emotions. Mine's in the 5, 6, 7 of emotions. And I'm like, no, okay. So this is where I set my expectations and I get really hurt. Or this is where I step into some of the most amazing ability to access, pleasure or joy, or because I'm looking at 5, 6, 7 of cups, right? I'm looking right in here, which is, it's how I can celebrate being a human in the world. And then 7 is like, yeah, I celebrated a little too hard and now I overdid it. That is so much sense, which is, if I'm hurt, I can be so hurt. Or if I'm balanced, I can be so balanced. Or if I'm mad, I can have a lot of expectations. And so all of a sudden now I know where to go to find out more about these wounds. Now, as an empath, this is going to be the most important thing to do.
Yeah, because what you're talking about there, especially, in your case, and thank you for, sharing vulnerably about your own, both challenges and opportunities, because there's two sides to every coin, right?
Right.
And so this is where that HSP kind of empath overlay happens, where we are biologically wired to be more emotionally responsive to both positive and negative. So, this is where you're kind of seeing like how that shows up for you. And then, okay, so we have these tendencies based on our sign and our house and, the tarot that matches that. And yet we get to choose, right? We get to choose what we do with it and how we express that energy.
And the choice is where we get to shift it from, wait a minute, I work in the realms of water. I understand emotions. I track emotions. And so I went through and I do this each week with my videos. When a word comes up that I want to make sure we have something solid around, I do a definition. And I had to laugh because I defined empath, right? And the dictionary says that it's a person with paranormal ability to apprehend the mental or emotional state of another individual. Sort of like you're weird, you're out there, and you're paranormal. And I thought, okay. And then the next one was, it's a highly sensitive individual who has a keen ability to sense what other people around them are thinking or feeling. Then I went down to the next level, which is they absorb other people's emotions, physical symptoms, or thoughts. Right? And so what I've been working with, since I work in the realm of emotions, and emotions and water and air can be very similar because they're systems that are invisible. So how do you understand them? How do you read them? My definition of an empath is someone who has an acute awareness of energy and can read the intensity and the differences in the subtleties of that energy and that patterning. When this gets really loud, I feel this way. When it gets really sharp, I feel this. When it's calm, I feel this. And so as an empath who reads the subtlety of energy or emotions in energy or thoughts in energy, right? Then all of a sudden the skill set is, man, I'm observant, I'm intelligent, I'm perceptive, I see subtle shifts in everything. I'm wise and I'm adaptable and I'm flexible and I'm multidimensional, which means I see things that other people don't. when we own that as a strength and we actually, like, I was watching, it was snowing yesterday, so I was on HBO and I watched Long Shot with Seth Rogen and Charlize Theron, where she's Secretary of State running for president, and her assistant gets right up in Seth Rogen's face and she goes, "You don't understand. I'm observant, I'm intuitive, I can read you, I can read the room, I have kick-ass emotional intelligence." And I was like, there it is.
Yay on mainstream TV. It's time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing. I've seen more and more of it coming out where,
Mm-hmm.
and I was on LinkedIn recently and I was like, well, LinkedIn's kind of stuffy and sort of for business and not as much about what I do. And I got on and people were talking about emotional intelligence and conscious entrepreneurship and, cannabis growing. And I went, what happened? And it's so lovely to see that our world is now coming to an awareness that these perceptive, intuitive, empathic gifts are a strength. We're meant to be here. There's a reason for that. And what I think it requires, Denise, is like being willing to go in and take a look at those patterns and shift those patterns, shift that energy, because if you can read energy, you can shift energy, right?
Exactly. Transform it the way you want it to go. You're the one. We are the ones who understand energy. So let's own it and let's lead with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I wanted to hear a little bit more. You touched upon the elements, right? I would love to hear how, you described astrology and psychology and tarot. How do the elements play into reading this chart and understanding yourself at a deeper level?
I learned all about the elements through tarot, because, whether it's Native American or indigenous practices of, the different elements, whether it's air, water, fire, and earth, right? Or it's mental, physical, emotional, spiritual. When, those are all represented in the four suits of tarot. And so over and over again, when I learned you get a red card, that's fire, that you have some passion, you have some intention and power behind it, that there's a force of action that's pushing you forward. When there's water, that it's invisible sometimes. You can't tell when the temperature shifts. You can't tell what's down deep. The surface might look good. Or it's visible. You can actually tell when it's choppy, that it holds sustenance, that it feeds our system, and that we're made of water. And then when we go to the mental, the mind, it's invisible, but it's the way we create systems, and it's the way we analyze and bring things into form in front of us. And the physical is how we embody our time on earth. What does our third dimension interaction look like? How do we care for this body and the areas we live in? How do we observe it and interact with it? When I take Chiron and put it into the house that holds that element, then I know that one of those four elements is where the wound is. And so a lot of times someone who's thinking constantly about the story may think that their wound is in holding that story over and over again in their mind and replaying it. What happens when we go to Chiron is maybe it shifts down to fire, right? To spirit. And all of a sudden, it's like when I feel this, I put a big torch behind it and I start forcing things in the world. I start making it bigger and trying to blow it up. That's when you see a lot of oppositional defiance, right? And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, the elements have some information in them as well, as far as where the wound shows up in our world. It's not that we have the wound, it's that what do we do with it? Look to the elements.
Yeah.
Do we stay in our head? Do we live in anxiety? Do we get overwhelmed and self-medicate constantly with our emotions? Do we try to control the world around us? And we've seen moms and dads who literally try to control everything, the schedule, the money, the way the kids look, the way they look, the way their relationship appears to others. Start to watch how it shows up out there in what elements.
And then once we become conscious of that, then we can make different decisions.
Of course.
Because we know this is our tendency, but not, it's not our destiny
It
to
is
lay out that wound over and over.
not at all. It's not our destiny on any way, shape, or form. It is our destiny to say, oh, when my little trigger gets hurt, when I feel an old wound, I turn around and I try to shape the physical dimension around me. And my kids don't like it when I try to control the world around them.
Yeah.
So then it's like, oh, I can soften my control and step into leadership and use it in a different way. And I can use all of those really strong research skills of mine and an ability to organize information and find out what my kids really need, and then create environments that help them and support them.
Mm-hmm. Because each person's chart, each person's overlay, each person's Chiron is going to be completely different. And trying to apply, like we do this with like so many things. We try to apply like what I know and what I need onto someone else. We project that, right?
Yes.
So what you're talking about is getting to know other people in your life and understanding where their wounds are perhaps, and being able to then be compassionate about that, because we all have these places.
Right. And then the most interesting discovery, and I made this about 10 minutes before the phone call, Bevan, was, once we understand where the wound resides and sort of what it takes, does it show up in our mental, which is how we process information in the depth of our processing, right? Or does it show up in the physical world where, too many things are overstimulating me and they're out there all the time and I don't know what to do. I have no control over the physical world. Or are they emotional, which is like, oh, I feel all these feelings from other people and mine and they get overwhelming? Or is there this sensual reaction to everything in my body that fuels a power surge in me that I have no idea what to do? Like I'm irritated. All of a sudden the DOES of sensitivity lays in to the elements, which also lays into what areas do we get overwhelmed by, and if the overwhelm is something we can learn about and manage, how do we turn overwhelm into skill sets and strengths?
I love just, how you're taking your background as a historian and then everything you studied, and you're templating it, if that's a word, together, and drawing these conclusions. I mean, empaths already know that there's a oneness, and what you're doing, Denise, is literally describing how all these different systems of working to understand ourselves really can work in conjunction with each other.
Oh, we're all meant to blend. If we learn anything about the future and where we're going, is that we're moving from separate principles or disciplines into blending and allowing things to crisscross and find out how to create resonance, how to create harmony, how to create collaboration between people. This is our future. These are just really fun ways of playing. Well, like throw all these things on the table and find out what they have in common and see if there's information there to collaborate.
And then trusting, as you learn that information, trusting you will be led to additional depths of understanding and additional messages, and maybe people will show up to help you practice. That's been my case.
Exactly. Maybe they're curious about this, and if they're not, at least I had fun with it, right? Because these things, they morph and they change. If I take one discipline and I hold it pretty soon it's pretty stagnant. It's just not fresh anymore, and I have to move on. So I'm moving and collecting information and turning it into teaching points constantly. It's the only way that I keep myself amused, and I'm finding out what my strengths are.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that everyone who's listening would love to connect. And I mean, you and I could probably talk for ages about all of these beautiful things, but like, where would be a good place for them to connect in with your work, to learn more about the Chiron aspects, everything that you're doing and putting together.
Oh, thank you, Bevan, for asking me that. I have a website. It's DeniseDrydenCoaching.com, and I'm an integrational coach, which is how do you integrate somewhat bizarre concepts together and grow through them. And so I have a couple of modules on there. I have, I think at this point, 180 weekly videos on all of these different topics. So you go watch the videos. You can also find them on YouTube and on LinkedIn. But make sure that you get to the website, because that's where the resources are. And if you want to do some work on Chiron, then there's a little Chiron wisdom session you can click on with me as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so let's just imagine that, I'm someone who's tuning in today and I'm thinking, I'm ready to start looking at these patterns. I'm ready to go back and I'm ready to see what's there for me and how I can shift maybe my deepest wound into kind of my greatest strength. What final advice would you have for people who are ready to start down that pathway?
Well, Chiron and all the centaurs who are part of the system, they're all nurturers. They're the ones who hold space. More recently there was this Chariklo who was supposed to be the wife of Chiron. Well, she's the one, the master at holding space and nurturing the body. So let's focus on, if we really want to go into a beautiful exploration of the wound, let's go in there gently. Let's go in there with compassion. Let's give yourself some space and time. Do some walking. Make sure you have some time for baths. Make sure you have some time for candlelight, and sort of look around and go, how do I softly and most gently sit down with this stuff and begin to explore it with a new perspective and an open eye on what gift did it give me? How can I nurture that gift forward, that strength forward? So self-care and nurturing is all what Chiron's about.
And I think that's beautiful advice for anyone. And I know a lot of people who are listening today will be, on a personal and spiritual growth journey, and, doing that gently rather than kind of our pusher going, we need to do more, we need to level up. I think that's such an important piece, is give yourself time, let it come in. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and your insight today, and teaching us about something like that I think a lot of us really love to do, which is look at all of the synchronicities and the patterns. And you just took us down this road to be able to take a deep dive into that. So thank you so much, Denise.
Oh, thank you, Bevan, for giving me the opportunity to play with you with this stuff and be able to share it with anyone who wants to hear it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for everyone who joined us. And we look forward to continuing to connect with you on the summit through all of the different wonderful speakers that we have. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for joining the Evolved Empath Summit, brought to you by the Shift Network. To learn more, visit evolvedempathsummit.com. To learn more about our global programs, to support you in waking up in all the areas of your life and taking inspired action, visit theshiftnetwork.com. Thank you again for joining us and for sharing this empowering path of embracing your empathic gifts with your friends and family.